Hello everyone, this is Data Driven Formula One with Patrick, Henz and Ganna Pogrebna. Hi Patrick.
Hello Ganna. Hello all.
Yeah, good to see you. And today we're talking about Alfa Romeo.
Right, Alfa Romeo, something which we not did in the past. We will discuss a little bit a whole team from the beginning to today. Also, we had a feedback from our listener or viewer, Stefan Asakriti, who asked why we not do an episode speaking a little bit how teams evolved over the time, and that's why we put here different chapters to see how the teams changed from, let's say, from factory teams a little bit more to garage teams, later in Formula One, becoming high-tech companies. So I included this into our episode, and just as a disclaimer, we split it in two. First, we will discuss Alfa Romeo before 1950, so before the start of official Formula One, and then in the second episode, we will start with 1950, and we will have the focus up to 2021, which is the year where we are recording.
Yeah, so basically there will be two parts, and yeah, Alfa Romeo is a legendary team. So when we discussed 1950s, we talked quite a lot about it. And yeah, it will be good to start from the beginning, in a sense. Well, at least not from so much from the beginning of Alfa Romeo itself, but from the beginning of racing, like history of Alfa Romeo. So this is what I'm planning to do today.
But in fact, it's not a big different. Racing practically started right in the beginning, as you say. Racing is part of the DNA of the company. And I like to play around a little bit with this little AI tool. I'm sure all of you know to animate the photo. And this is what we try to reach, to bring back history to life. And quite interesting, the history when we speak about Alfa Romeo didn't start in Italy, but in France. And it started all with Alexandre Derek. He started an automotive company in France. And interesting, first he started with combustion engines, but after this he also invested into electric drives. So, and this was not quite unusual. Many companies in the beginning of the automobile have been betting on the electric engine. One other company was Siemens, offering electric cars. But as we all know, in the beginning, it went to the combustive engine. Just now, with Tesla and Co, we seem to go to the electric drive. And this is also where we will end, I think, in the second episode, speaking about Alfa Romeo.
Yeah, so the original company was Alfa, right?
Right, it was Alfa. So this was the original Italian company which Alexander Derek founded together with his Italian partner Ugo Stella. It was Alfa Anonima Lombardia Fabbrica Automobili, and so translated roughly into into automotive company Lombardia, and Lombardia is the region around Milan in Italy. So this is where it all started, 1909. And then we get Nicola Romeo into the play. He was originally from Naples, south of the country. He studied at the Politecnico di Napoli, where he also received his diploma in engineering. Interesting, as part of his studies, he went also to Liège, Belgium, quite near my hometown in Germany. He got a second degree in electrical engineering. And in the beginning, he was not directly focusing on the automobile, but founded in 1911 his first company, Ingegnere Nicola Romeo & Co. And he manufactured machinery machines for the mining industry.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, he
Right.
started in mining, and we talked about several different interesting starts, right, in automotive, like Maserati, Lamborghini, and yeah. So yeah, you have to understand that kind of the original ideas in automotive came from many different places, including just general engineering. And then in case of Nicola Romeo, he was essentially working in mining engineering, so he was producing basically machines for mining, and which eventually translated into very good cars. But originally it was the mining technology.
Right. So 4 more years, now we are 1915, he acquired a major part of Alfa directly from Alexandre Derek, as Derek was a little bit struggling, as the engines which have been successful in France and also in Germany. For example, Derek had been working together with Adam Opel, quite a well-known name for German automotives. But it seems that for Italy, they not had been that adequate, because Italians had been looking for a little bit stronger engines. So he sold a part to Mr. Romeo, and already some years later, Nicola Romeo became the sole owner, and accordingly he changed the name to Alfa Romeo, and this was in 1920, and this was also when practically the first cars left the factory with the new Alfa Romeo logo.
Yeah, and that's also an interesting change between sort of the beginning of 20th century and now, when it used to be that you would borrow ideas from other industries into automotive, and now it's more kind of technology that is developed in Formula One is transferring into other areas. And I think we have one of the early episodes about how technology from Formula One changed other areas, and it was used in space and in health and in other areas. Yeah, so this is also an interesting difference between the beginning of automotive in the 20th century and now. Yeah, but now we are at the stage when Alfa Romeo Racing was established, right? So
exactly, you may say
participate in Grand Prix.
Exactly, you may say that racing always had been a part of Alfa Romeo, or also part of Alfa even before Romeo joined. But also, I mean, we are in complete different times. Now we are speaking really about the pioneers of the automobile industries, and practically to market a new technology, it was quite common that you participated in racing. We know that the wife of Daimler-Benz promoted her husband's car while driving it. We saw that already at the end of the 19th century, we had the first automobile race in France. So right in the beginning, it was normal that the first factories, they promote their cars through racing. But anyway, now we're speaking about Alfa Romeo, and as you see, I'm quite good prepared today for this episode.
Yes, for those of you who, we just need to explain to the podcast viewers that Patrick is wearing a jacket with Alfa Romeo colors and even logo.
Right. So as we said, racing already started before Alfa became Alfa Romeo. We had the first race car in 1913, and back later in 1925, they already won the then inaugural World Championship for Grand Prix cars. So they've been quite successful right from the beginning. These race victories gave the company a sporty image, which it has up to today. And also Enzo Ferrari, first his Scuderia Ferrari, it was not an independent company, but it was practically the racing department of Alfa Romeo. Before he left the company, I think he had 2 or 3 years where he wasn't allowed to use his own name. But after this, he founded the Ferrari company and then had his Scuderia Ferrari using the Ferrari cars. But right at the beginning, it was the Alfa Romeo Racing department.
Yeah, so and when we discussed the earlier racing history in basically 1950s and so on, we actually discussed quite a few people who raced Alfa Romeo cars, and a lot of photos that we showed you back then were of people in Alfa Romeo cars. Yeah, another thing to mention here for those of you who didn't watch the previous episodes, yeah, you need to understand that the Formula One championships only started in 1950, but before then there were many different Grand Prix running independently, so it was not as like one championship, but there were many trophies. And Alfa Romeo was very successful in these Grand Prix. So essentially, this was one of the leading car manufacturer for racing, and had a very good reputation back then.
Yep. Yes, and for the case you're watching us on video on YouTube, and we will come to this later also now on Spotify. Here's a photo from my last trip to Milan. It's the Castello Sforzesco, which is right in the historic center of the town. And what you see here is the logo from the city, which is also based on the logo of the ruling family back in Renaissance time. It shows the cross and the dragon, and this is what also became the logo of Alfa Romeo. And it's up to the legend that the idea for the logo was born at the train stop right besides this castle. The draftsman Romano Cattaneo, and he was a friend of Giuseppe Merosi, the designer of the first Alfa car, was waiting there, waiting for the bus or the train. No, sorry, it's a train stop right at the castle. So he was waiting for the tram number 14, and he saw the castle and he saw the logo at the castle and thought this would be a nice idea which we can use for our logo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is basically a very legendary logo, and actually Alfa Romeo is one of the most recognized brands up to now, and yeah, definitely like Patrick said, even kind of before the establishment of the independent Scuderia Ferrari, this was Alfa Romeo brand. But Alfa Romeo brand, as you all know, is still it still exists. So it was a good choice of a brand. So definitely, I mean, I'm sure that this is not just because of the logo, but because of the quality of the cars. But nevertheless, this is officially one of the most recognized brands in the world, not only in automotive, but generally, if we take well-recognized brands, Alfa Romeo will be at the top.
Yes, and it's quite popular that we speak about storytelling for modern companies, to storytelling to market the products, but also for internal processes. And this logo, it's practically also storytelling. It's a quite, when we think about Renaissance time, Milan was a very important city. It was ruled by the Visconti family. And the Visconti family had one problem. They needed a better family story, because based on the family story, also your particular relation to God, you can claim why you are the ruler of the city and nobody would criticize you. So they asked somebody to write, or let's say to enhance a little bit the family story, and they came up with the idea that one of the earlier Viscontis fought a dragon and killed the dragon. Other people think this may be also related to the Crusades. So anyway, this story is what we see here with the snake, as we call it today. But in fact, it should symbolize a dragon. And maybe if you not have looked that close on the logo, a lot of people think that the dragon is like with fire coming out of his mouth, but in fact, it's a little person which the snake was eating right at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. So, and this brings us to the first part of Alfa Romeo Racing history. And we will be talking about the first racing cars that Alfa Romeo produced.
Exactly. And in general, we are in times of the automotive pioneers. So the first brave men, and unfortunately only few women who started in these cars. We start our story with 1920. You see here a photo from the Targa Floria in Sicilia, in the south of Italy, and you see how Grand Prix cars looked like 100 years ago.
Yeah, if you're watching us on YouTube, you will be able to see the photo of Alfa Romeo cars in 1920s, and yeah, it was a very successful racing team. So they produced a lot of champions of this, like I said, this independent Grand Prix that were running at the time. Which then, I mean, this success later translated into Formula One.
Yeah, and quite interesting, a lot of famous races which still are news today already existed in 1920. For example, Le Mans, Indianapolis, Targa Florio not exists anymore as a modern race, but still known up to date. So, and especially Mugello. Mugello is not only the hometown of Ferrari, but they had also a racetrack, and I assume this is the still racetrack in Mugello, which still exists today. Today we have here motor racing, motorcycle racing, but also it gets used, for example, to teach autonomous cars to see and behave in traffic. So this, if it's still the same racetrack at Mugello, also a big history here.
Yeah, and here also we want to make a note again. If you missed the previous episodes, you need to understand that back in the day, the teams as such did not exist. So what you would normally have is some racers who would buy a car and then they would race in it. So effectively, quite a few people were racing Alfa Romeo cars. So if you could see, if you're watching us on YouTube, you could see a list on the screen of quite a few racetracks, and Alfa Romeo could participate in different countries with different drivers. So it doesn't mean that it was the one team with kind of multiple cars and multiple drivers. It just meant that there were many different racers who chose Alfa Romeo as their racing car, so which was also a sign of quality.
Exactly, and so 1920 we had the first victory for the young Alfa Romeo team. Giuseppe Campari won at Mugello with the 4060. And with this, let's carry on. 1921 to 23, We just put here some examples where Alfa Romeo was successful. Again, 21, Campari won again at Mugello, again with the 4060. In 1923, we had again success in Targa Florio with Ugo Sivocci with the Alfa Romeo RL TF. In Italy, Cremona, Antonio Ascari, the father of Alberto Ascari. And in Ravenna, also Italy, where we had quite young Enzo Ferrari driving an Alfa Romeo RL TF, standing for Targa Florio. As you remember, if you saw our episode about Enzo Ferrari, in the beginning he started as a race driver. But he not started, but first he was the race driver before he was the team manager. And so he participated in Ravenna, and here he had been successful for the team.
Yeah, and we can, I guess, safely say that Alfa Romeo was also one of the inspirations for Scuderia Ferrari team. And definitely, you know, with his racing experience, and Enzo Ferrari took quite a lot of experience out of driving Alfa Romeo cars when he was designing his own cars eventually.
Yes. I mean, he started practically designing his first car, still being an employee of Alfa Romeo. And
that's right.
when we think about the B-Motore, which is pretty much based on Enzo Ferrari's philosophy that the focus is on the engine and not on the aerodynamics. And of course, we will present you that car also today. Famous logo of the Alfa Romeo Racing department up to today is the Quattrofoglio Verde, which you see also on the photo of this beautiful Alfa Romeo Targa Florio. There's a story behind, and it's a little bit tragic also, unfortunately. And it was invited by the mechanics of Ugo Sivocci. He was a very good race driver, but unfortunately lacking luck, meaning he was good in the race but never finished it. And to overcome this potential bad luck, his mechanics put a sticker on the car showing a green cleave. This is traditional.
Clover. Yeah, it's a four-leaf clover. Yeah, so it's said to bring good luck, right? So if you find a four-leaf clover, then you have good luck.
Exactly, and so this he used, and it seemed it brought good luck to him. So he always used it, and besides being a symbol for good luck, another reason why the people at Alfa Romeo put this on his car could have been that it's also quietly easy to distinguish and helped the other drivers to distinguish him, for example, in opposite to other drivers, and maybe let him pass by a little bit faster, because besides this, all the cars looked quite the same, dark red, so it was quite difficult to say who was whom. So this maybe had been another reason why this symbol was painted on the car.
Yeah, and of course,
unfortunately, yes?
Yeah. I just wanted to say, and of course, so these things also have just a psychological effect, right? It's not that.
Yes.
If you paint a clover, it will make you faster. If you paint a clover on your car, it will make you faster necessarily. But of course, it has a psychological effect, and you know, in this case, it did work. So it did change the psychological state of the driver, and naturally, Ugo Sivocci, and you know, basically, it had there was a difference between before and after. Let's just say before and after putting this clover on the car. In the
but then Yeah, but then happened, unfortunately, the tragedy. Ugo Sivocci, he was testing the new Alfa Romeo P1, this in preparation for the Italian Grand Prix. As it was a test, they not painted the car adequately with this symbol, and he died in testing the car. As we discussed in some episodes before, a lot of people in motorsports are quite superstitious, and this had been also the case here with the Alfa Romeo team, because
I was gonna say we probably should do a special when we talk about prejudices and all sorts of superstitions with but it's not only the drivers but also the team principals that have these different weird rituals, and yeah, we can definitely talk about that. So some of them are quite funny, so we do need to probably bring them up because it will make a nice story.
Yeah, we still have it on our to-do list. And this is the reason why after this, all Alfa Romeo cars had this clover as a sign of good luck, and also because people are superstitious, as they may think that leaving this off may bring bad luck. Now let's go to 1924, and also a big thank you to the press department of Stellantis, who supported us here with some nice photos. So we have some additional pictures to show also. Thanks to the museum, a lot of the pictures which we see today, I had the opportunity to take myself, like this Alfa Romeo RL, a very beautiful car. Really, if you have in Milan, you really have to visit the museum. I think it's one of the most beautiful car museums around the world anyway. So 1924, still successful, Signore Enzo Ferrari. He won in Ravenna, he won in Polesine. And by the way, you see, even if you're speaking about the factory racing department, the budget has been quite limited, so most of the races where Alfa Romeo participated had been in Italy, while, for example, on the other side, most of the races where Bugatti participated had been in France, and really travel had been quite difficult with lacking of budget, and of course we don't have this good infrastructure as we have right today.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I just wanted to say that if we look at Alfa Romeo RL, which is really a very pretty car, probably like one of the prettiest cars ever made. And it's also good to see, if you're watching us on YouTube, some of the older pictures with people actually inside the car. And it must have been really a joy to race it. Because definitely it was one of the leading designs at the time, one of the most powerful engines at the time. And yeah, as you can see with Enzo Ferrari and Antonio Ascari participating and winning quite a lot of races, yeah, it was a very successful design.
Yep, and also it continues being successful, and here we have the new Alfa Romeo P2, really beautiful car, as you can see it in the museum, but also I brought it here to show a little bit in the camera. So really beautiful and interesting, as you may recognize. In the 1920s, the red was quite different than today. It was a much darker red, and also it was matte, not shining.
Yeah, so, we discussed this before with the colors, that you know, with the introduction of TV broadcasting in Formula One, a lot of experience changed, and obviously the cars became brighter and shinier because they look better on screen. And there were, of course, some kind of more obvious technical reasons for this, right? With the weight, because some like deeper colors obviously require more coats of paint, and more coats of paint means that your car is heavier. And
right.
yeah, so this was also one of the kind of more technical reasons why this happened.
Yeah. And in 1925, we have a championship, and here Alfa Romeo won the championship. But if we are speaking about championship, it's a combination of just 4 races: Indianapolis, Spa-Francorchamps, and Monterey and Monza. And due to the 2 victories, Alfa Romeo won the championship. At that time, it was only a championship for the manufacturer, but not for the driver.
Yeah, and I just want to say that we have here on screen, I think, like a small error with where it says Alberto Ascari. It's meant Antonio.
Oh, yes.
Antonio, this is the father of Alberto Ascari. I mean, it's quite obvious from the picture that says that's Antonio, not Alberto. But yeah, I mean, obviously. Alberto Ascari was also racing Alfa Romeo, and then Ferrari. We had a separate episode about Alberto Ascari, and both the father and the son, they died in racing. So this family basically devoted their lives to the sport, and Alfa Romeo was a big part of the family life of Ascari racers.
Yeah. In 1926, Alfa Romeo was a little bit less successful. They couldn't score any points in the 4 races, so this time the championship went to Bugatti. Similar in 1927, where Delage won the championships, and for the obvious reason, we didn't have any championship between 1928 and 1930.
And this is exactly when we had Scuderia Ferrari on the rise, right? So essentially, on the one hand, yeah, it's unfortunate to see kind of the downturn of Alfa Romeo in late 1920s, but that's probably also a good thing, because who knows, maybe we wouldn't have had Scuderia Ferrari otherwise. You know, if Alfa Romeo was doing great, maybe Enzo Ferrari wouldn't decide to have his own brand and would continue working for Alfa Romeo.
Yeah, who knows? So we are back with championship in 1931, and we had here now the European Championship, and it was won again by Alfa Romeo, by Fernando Minoy. You see him on the photo if you're seeing us in YouTube, or also now on Spotify. The season was again quite limited, to be honest. Monza, Monterey, and Spa-Francorchamps. And here we had Alfa Romeo with victory in Monza, Giuseppe Campari with the famous Tasio Nuvolari in the new Alfa Romeo 8C 2300. While the other races had been won by Bugatti, but due to the other positions, the championship went to Alfa Romeo and the new Alfa Romeo race department after Enzo Ferrari left, which was named Alfa Corse, a name which they would use also later in the 1990s again. And I think also already in the 1980s. 1932, Alfa Romeo stayed quite successful, winning again the championship. And again, it's Tasio Nuvolari, I think not only in Italy, quite a legend, but unfortunately for him, his time was before start of Formula One, so is maybe not that known in comparison to Fangio, who started like 20 years later. but really very successful driver. We had 3 races in 1932. Monza, where Nuvolari won with the Alfa Romeo P3. Rhein, they won again. And Nürburgring, also we have a victory for Alfa Romeo P3. And here the driver was Rudolf Caracciola. The name sounds very Italian, but he was German, but of course with Italian heritage.
Yeah, and Patrick has kindly included the Alfa Romeo P3 photo on this on a slide. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can see it, and it's a really pretty design. But also, as Patrick said, it's kind of revolutionized and reborn Alfa Romeo as a brand, because it was such a competitive and fast car.
Yes.
And definitely this was this essentially meant that Alfa Romeo would continue in racing, and it allowed Alfa Romeo to then produce very strong cars for later for the Formula One championship.
Yeah.
Because we saw quite a few brands, right, when they sort of they are on decline, they basically disappear. That didn't happen with Alfa Romeo, which is great.
Right. I mean, I think the most famous brand right at the beginning was Bugatti, who unfortunately not survived. It was reborn various times, but it's not a continuous story, but companies bought practically the name and then started a new Bugatti company, which happened various times over the years, and which is up. So Bugatti exists also again today, but it has not much in common than the Bugatti in company from the beginning.
Yeah, that's right. Which brings us to the second part, and we will talk about the systems now, right? And the earlier racing, and how
Yes.
Alfa Romeo team contributed to the development of the systems in racing.
Yeah, if we speak here about systems, the idea is we speak about the political systems. We discussed in our episodes before, especially when we speak about races in Latin America, as we spoke about in Argentina, in Mexico, but also we spoke about Spain. Racing was seen as a sign of technical progress, and also a sign of political progress inside the society. And victories on the racetrack, unfortunately, had been, let's say, misinterpreted as a superiority of a political system. As we are in the 1930s, this had been, unfortunately, in Europe. We saw this in Italy, where Alfa Romeo became what we see on the screen, which became owned by the government. So, and one of the biggest Alfa Romeo fans in Italy was Mussolini himself. On the other side, we saw the same in Germany, where the German competitors like Auto Union and Mercedes-Benz have been heavily supported by the Nazi regime. This also to show technical progress and progress of the political system. That's why this chapter we called the systems.
Yeah, and I mean, we have to say that you know, when we consider the kind of the Nazi regimes and generally also tyrannies, right? We talked about that in the 1950s as well. So we actually discussed that, you know, there was normally quite a lot of support for technical progress, including technical progress in automotive, because obviously, you know, you needed to showcase the strengths of the industry, and these regimes were particularly interested in that. And so automotive was a very obvious contender for support. because this was then easy to show that, okay, we have technical progress in these areas, right? To get support from the crowd, which also had to do with the development of the military capacity and of the obvious military conflicts that these regimes have participated in later.
Yeah. Let's go shortly back to 1921. A big part of the Alfa Romeo company was financed by the Banca Italiana di Sconto. And unfortunately, the bank went bankruptcy and the state had to save the bank. I mean, something which we also heard in modern times. And so the government got more and more influence into the company. And as a result, in 1928, Nicola Romeo left the company, not directly based on his own will, but he was, let's say, pushed out.
Yeah,
pushed out, motivated to leave, or how he wanted to call it. And finally, in 1933, the state ownership was reorganized under the banner of the Italian state industrial organization Istituto per la Ricostruzione Industriale IRI, which then had the effective control over Alfa Romeo, and this stayed until 1986, if I remember right, the year that Alfa Romeo had been part of the government and not a private company.
Yeah, and if we look at generally at automotive history, not just motorsport history, the involvement of the government sometimes is a positive factor, right? And in this case, it was rather a negative factor because of the key figures like Nicola Romeo, left the brand. But on the other hand, of course, it meant more financial support. Obviously, the state is more capable of producing financial support than probably private operation. And then, of course, it's a miracle that Alfa Romeo actually survived, right? After such serious changes, and survived as a brand, right? They could have renamed it, could have been all sorts of things that could have happened. But so we are quite lucky to still have Alfa Romeo, considering its history.
Yeah, because besides all the advantages what you've mentioned, of course, there are also disadvantages.
Yeah, big disadvantages.
There are also some which mostly, and you may imagine it, is extended bureaucracy. Quite interesting. So normally, you would say this would make it quite impossible to be successful on the track, but at least in the beginning, Alfa Romeo stayed competitive. And I mean, with Renault, we have another example where a governmental-owned company was quite successful in motorsports.
Yeah, well, this if we take French automotive in general, right, they have quite a lot of financial support from the government. Mm-hmm. And if we take late sort of 20th century history of French automotive, when the French government basically decided to take over some of the brands, to revive them and to make them competitive internationally. So this was rather a positive move. But I mean, in this case, obviously, we on the one hand, it's of course great that the key figures didn't agree to collaborate with controversial and kind of controversial takeovers from the Nazi regimes, and but on the other hand, yeah, it could have meant the end of the brand really easily. So yeah, like I said before, it's quite lucky that the brand survived these changes. Yeah. So that brings us to 1935. So yeah.
Exactly, and this is here we see the results what we already discussed. we have the competition between the different political systems, and Germany, as the, let's say, the bigger country, the more richer country, they had more possibilities to technically but also financially support their teams. We see here mostly Mercedes-Benz, but also Auto Union, and the 1935 it was completely dominated by Mercedes-Benz and the famous W25, which not only included a very strong engine, but also they started including aerodynamics, which wasn't possible for Alfa Romeo. At that time, Enzo was still part of the racing team, and that's why I mentioned that the first Ferrari was maybe already designed as he still was a part of Alfa Romeo, because based on Enzo's philosophy that aerodynamics is something, if you can't build engine, he discussed with the mechanics what we can do against this Mercedes. Honestly, Alfa Romeo didn't have the technical possibilities due to a lack of funding to really reconstruct a new race car. So they used the existing P3 and built a second engine. So if you see us here, you see the engine in the front, but also there's a second engine in the back,
yeah.
which gave the car much more power. There had been, but the victories, well, I think it was only one victory at the end, which was on the Avos in Germany. The Avos, it's a quite strange racetrack. In fact, it's two straight lines and 180 degrees curves. So, and this was where this car was dominating. But besides this, the car had the power, but the problem was, you may imagine, the weight. And so it used a lot of tires, so there had been more pit stops necessary. And
yeah, reliability suffers, of course. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
if you have one engine, so if you have two engines, it's not only twice the power, right? It's also double the problem, because what can happen with one engine in terms of reliability. And generally, engine is one of the least reliable car parts in racing car, right? So this is what you ideally would want to change frequently to make sure that it works. But I mean, when you have two engines, obviously a lot of things can go wrong, and a lot of different things can go wrong. So right. Yeah.
So practically, the car wasn't really used besides the Avos race, and you see here the results from the 1935 season. We have won 7 races, 6 won by Mercedes, and interesting, fascinating. The only victory was for Alfa Romeo was at the Nürburgring. By Tasio Nuvolari, which for Enzo Ferrari was the best driver who ever was and ever will be. And with the quite old-fashioned Alfa Romeo P3, and this was the normal P3 with the single engine. Many said later that the race at the Nürburgring was the perfect race, or also the impossible victory, because the car was really lacking a lot in comparison to the Mercedes or even the Auto Union. So you remember Nürburgring, the 22 kilometers race, also known as the Green Hell. And what the spectators saw, Nuvolari was driving the whole time really on the limit without any kind of error, and there was also it was raining, but he really was much faster than the Mercedes drivers with the superior cars, and due to this it was called later the impossible victory.
Yeah, and
Would
we already discussed this, right? That in the rain, what matters more is the skill of the driver. So even if you are in inferior car in the rain, everyone slows down. So you have a chance as a driver in inferior car to win against drivers in superior cars if you are more skillful. And certainly this shows the skill of Tazio Nuvolari and his experience. And basically, at the time of this race, he was the most skillful driver on the track. So that's yeah. So and we previously discussed how kind of externalities like weather affects races, but in this case, obviously, it was not only the victory of Alfa Romeo, but the victory of a very skillful driver, Tazio Nuvolari, who made it happen.
Yeah, so it's practically David versus Goliath story of poor against rich. Would have been the perfect. I mean, you have to imagine it was 1935. It was Germany, the Nürburgring. So a lot of high-ranking governmental people had been there, awaiting the normal Mercedes victory. To celebrate them, to celebrate the systems, the political party itself. And at the end, it didn't happen, but the little Italian, little Italians say that way, won the race. And it should have been, as you maybe imagine it from the fourth Rocky movie, where, no, sorry, was it the fourth? With Drago, I don't know. Where we had Rocky against Drago in Russia, and at the end, the underdog Sylvester Stallone, Rocky won, and even the Soviet governmental started to applaud. So something like this happened at this race. So it would have been the perfect Hollywood movie. Why it never happened? Maybe because of the downside that, as mentioned in the beginning, Alfa Romeo was supported by the Mussolini government, so it's not that you can say that easily it was good against bad, David going against Goliath. But you may imagine a little bit like a Rocky movie.
Okay. 1936.
Exactly. So
and
besides this
we
miracle,
still have P3, right? And we still have Alfa Romeo P3.
Exactly. So besides the single miracle, 1936 continued as you would have imagined. German companies dominated. Again, this time Bernd Rosemeyer with the Auto Union. Also, as they had a more a new car superior to the Mercedes, including more aerodynamics, including I think it was the one with the engine in the back. So Auto Union was the car to beat, and nevertheless, due to the skills, the driving skills by Nuvolari, he could at the end finish third in the championship with a car which was honestly not competitive in 36.
Yeah, definitely. And again, we have kind of skill versus technology here. But in this case, it was not just a single race that was affected, but the whole, well, it's not really a standard season, but we can say 1936 season in a sense that there were many different independent Grand Prix.
Yeah, and due to the skills, Enzo Ferrari, as I mentioned, for him was Nuvolari the best driver around. Maybe Nuvolari was also the reason why Enzo stopped racing himself, because he understood he never could drive on the level than Nuvolari. So if he later identified talented drivers for Formula One, he should have said, I see a little Nuvolari in you, which he said with Alberto Ascari, and also later famously with Gilles Villeneuve.
Yeah, and
Okay,
this is
now,
yeah. Also, I just want to say that now we are
yeah,
talking about a period kind of on the verge of the First World War, so we also need to put that into historical
yeah,
historical context. So we are talking about it like it would be kind of a normal automotive competition, but you know, the political situation obviously was more and more more and more complex. And naturally, it was very difficult to. It became more and more difficult to produce the cars, even though you know there was probably some financial support, considering that it was the team was at the time supported by Mussolini government, but nevertheless, you know, the whole situation was becoming more and more complicated around automotive in general and racing in particular.
exactly. I mean, you just have to see the results. The 1937 season was won by Rudolf Caracciola with the Mercedes W125. Best Alfa Romeo was Tazio Novellari, and together with Nino Farina, with whom we also spoke in our episode, but really big gap. And quite interesting if you see us on YouTube or Spotify. At that time, the winner was the driver with the fewer points. So you got fewer points for winning than being, let's say, the second, third, etc. So that's not an error on our slides. It's really the first one. The winner had 13 points, while the on the seventh position you had 28 points.
Mm-hmm. And of course,
In
Nina
general,
Farina, yeah, and of course Nina Farina, the first champion, later became the first champion of Formula One, and yeah, he did race Alfa Romeo, so that's something that also we need to keep in mind.
Yeah. 38, same picture, Rudolf Caracciola winning 8 points. Best Alfa Romeo was Nino Farina with 21 points. There was practically a whole season in 39, but the winner was not communicated for political reasons. I'm not completely sure why.
Well, the war started, so I think it just wasn't appropriate to name the winner. Well, I mean, I guess I understand your logic, Patrick, that, I mean, there was supposed to be someone, right, who would emerge, but probably there were other priorities at the time.
Yes, but let's say as far as I understood this, the winner was, there have been various races and it was practically already decided, the championship. And I think it was the Auto Union car, but the German government not wanted to communicate him as a driver, but politically said that the Mercedes driver would have won the championship. I'm not quite sure what was behind this, but officially, due to these discussions, winner for the championship was not announced officially.
Yeah, an Alfa course. This is again beautiful cars photographed by Patrick from the Alfa Romeo Museum that you can see on your screens if you're watching us on video on YouTube. And yeah, this is already 1950 Alfa Romeo 158 that you can see, and it's absolutely beautiful. But we're talking about Alfa course. Right. And, yeah, and so this is also a very historic moment in the development of Alfa Romeo Racing.
Yes, as we discussed, Alfa Romeo was part of the government, and there was Alfa Romeo decided to stop to renaming the racing department at not having it as Scuderia Ferrari, but has it now as Alfa Corse. Enzo Ferrari lost parts of his independence, of his ability for decision making, stayed a little bit around, but then decided, I don't want to work under these conditions. He left the company. He wasn't allowed to use the Ferrari name for, I think, 3 years.
3 years.
So his first company,
That's
he founded Auto Avio Costruzioni, and only later the Scuderia Ferrari. So now, when we're speaking about racing at Alfa Romeo, it's the Alfa Corse team. Later, it should change. It should become Auto Delta. Later, it would become Nord Auto. It would be again Alfa Corse. So a lot of changes in the naming of the Alfa Romeo racing department.
That's right. And yeah, so we are now post World War II already, and yeah, 1946. So as you can see, between sort of the two world wars, there was a period of kind of chaos, and even though some races were happening, obviously, you know, you couldn't really speak about a particular brand being dominating, right, or something. So really, we are coming back to racing properly in 1946.
Right, and I mean, as you know, a lot, big parts of Europe had been destroyed, so there hadn't been much new developments. The cars had been developed practically before the Second World War, and so they used the same designs. And we had major races, like for example in Bois-de-Boulogne, Perpignan-Dijon, Geneva, Turin, Milan, and we see more and more racing in Latin America, South America particularly. So Alfa Romeo was quite successful in 1946 with the Alfa Romeo 308. Again, very beautiful car, which, if I remember right, they don't have in the museum in Milan. So if you are watching us, the photo here is from the Indianapolis Museum in the US.
Yeah, I'm sure they do have it in the museum. It's just it's not on display, right? So we have to understand that a lot of what museums have, they don't actually have an opportunity to display always. Yeah, and yeah, it's not like they don't have it, but it's just probably not on display. But it's good that we actually see the Alfa Romeo 308. That's a really cute car. And I believe it was there was a special exhibit in Coventry at one point when this car was displayed there as well. So it's very pretty.
Yeah, and quite a funny coincidence. The car is we see here has the number 33, which is a quite famous number for Alfa Romeo, which we will discuss in the second episode. 47, same as before. No championship, but a lot of single races. We see, if you see the victories for Alfa Romeo, so this you see them in Brazil, Interlagos, in Argentina, in Rosario, Rafaela, again, Interlagos, Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, Montevideo, Uruguay, Mar del Plata, again, Argentina. So why there had been so many races in South America? I think there are different reasons. First of all, South America wasn't destroyed in the Second World War. Also, as in the time of the different world wars, rich people, for example, people from the US, they still did their summer holidays. So in the past, maybe they would have traveled to Europe. As it wasn't possible, a lot of the rich people traveled to South America, especially Brazil and Argentina. So if you visit, for example, Rio de Janeiro, if you see the famous Hotel Copacabana, or if you see downtown Buenos Aires, there had been growing places, especially in the 1940s. So in the time when there was the Second World War, and also when when big parts of Europe had been still destroyed, so not really a destination for tourists. So a lot of people, a lot of money had been going into South America. And also we had governments which supported the progress, or at least wanted to communicate that they are related progress. I mean, if you see the Brazilian flag, it even says progress and order. So again, similar to governments before the World War in Europe, a lot of the regimes in South America, Latin America, also saw motorsports as a sign of progress.
Yeah. Benefits in organizing these races.
Yeah. And of course, due to this, we had also a lot of rich people living in Brazil and Argentina. As you said, these race drivers, they had been gentleman drivers, so meaning they bought their cars themselves and then raced them. And this is practically how it would state until the end of the 1940s. So the 308 and also the new Alfa Romeo 158. And exactly this is the 58, which we would see later in the championship.
Yes,
in the Formula One championship.
Yeah, that's right. And again, you can see the iconic style or design of Alfa Romeo car, this kind of bullet-shaped car that dominated the 1950s practically, right? So this type of design of the car was very successful in racing, and influenced a lot of further designs that we see that we saw later in Formula One.
Exactly.
Yeah, with that, this is the end of the first part. And we're talking about Alfa Romeo, and we will hope to see you for the second part as well, where we discuss the progression of Alfa Romeo team from 1950 to now. We are currently in 2021. So join us for the second part. And I just want to remind you that we are on practically all media, and thanks to Patrick, we've also been spotted by Spotify, and now the video is available on Spotify as well.
Exactly, because we have the honor and pleasure to be included into the beta testing at Spotify as they are testing not only to host audio podcasts but also video podcasts. So our new episodes, you can see them directly as video if you want to. I mean, you can also just listen to us, whatever you prefer. And also we will change our old episode to make them available as a video on Spotify. So it will be interesting for us to see where this is going with Spotify. We are inside the beta testing, but for all cases, I mean, our base stays YouTube.
Yes, that's right. And just again to reiterate why we're not using some of the footages that you can see in other probably in other discussions about Formula One. We essentially our conviction is to do things ethically, so we only use photos that either we've taken ourselves, or we use photos that have an open license, so we can obtain the license for. So we just also want to insist on this rule, and this is why in our analysis of Formula One history or races, you only see ethically sourced material. Right. So let's just say, so that's what we are at least trying to do. So, but thank you for staying with us, and we hope to see you next time.
Yeah. See you.
See you later.
See you later.